On the deck of the Calypso Dawn, 5 figures moved with the quiet precision of people who had rehearsed every step. The vessel was small, privately chartered, its equipment cobbled together from universities and private investors, but to those on board it felt like the beginning of history. Dr. Emily Vargas, a marine archaeologist with a reputation for chasing myths, checked her watch for the 10th time. She had spent years arguing that the sonar anomaly east of the Azores was not a quirk of geology, but evidence of something buried. This was her chance to prove it. Beside her, Aaron Keane and Leo Hart, 2 young tech entrepreneurs funding the expedition, whispered nervously about the discovery of the century, while their cameraman, Marcus, adjusted his rig. The last member of the team, veteran diver Daniel Shaw, sat quietly with his helmet in his lap, staring at the sea. At noon, the hatch of the submersible sealed with a metallic clang. The cabin lights flickered on, casting pale shadows across anxious faces. With a hiss of compressed air, the small craft dropped beneath the waves, leaving the sunlight behind in a swirl of bubbles. At first the descent was routine. Fish scattered as the beams of the floodlights cut through the gloom, and the intercom buzzed with idle chatter. But as the depth gauge ticked past 1,000 feet, something shifted. The water around them darkened to an almost metallic black, and a faint vibration hummed through the hull. Marcus leaned close to the viewport and muttered that the silt was rising in strange patterns, as if stirred by unseen currents. The deeper they went, the more their instruments faltered. The compass needle spun lazily. The sonar screen stuttered, and once, for a full minute, every gauge went dead. Only the faint whir of the thrusters reassured them that they were still moving. Then Daniel swore under his breath. Out of the blackness ahead, the floodlights caught something vast and angular. At first it looked like cliffs rising from the seabed, but the edges were too sharp, too deliberate. A line of rectangular blocks stretched away into the gloom, each one the size of a house, their surfaces scored with parallel grooves. The crew fell silent. Emily pressed her face to the glass, her breath fogging the viewport. "That's not natural," she whispered. The trench had not led them to rock. It had led them to ruins. The submersible crept forward, its beams sweeping across the seabed like searchlights in a ruined metropolis. What they revealed was not rubble, but structure. Towering pylons rose from the sand, their bases buried deep, their tops vanishing into the murk. Domes lay half-collapsed, their curved surfaces scarred but intact, as though centuries of weight had failed to erase them. Emily pressed her palms to the viewport, struggling to take it all in. "It's a city," she breathed. "God, it's an entire city down here." No one answered. Even Aaron, usually quick to joke, sat with his mouth slightly open, staring as the ruins stretched on into darkness. Marcus raised his camera shakily, the red light blinking as he captured frame after frame, but his hands trembled so badly the lens rattled against the glass. The floodlights picked out strange details. Carvings spiraled across the stone pylons, repeating motifs that pulsed faintly with bioluminescence. Arches yawned like gateways, their thresholds lined with ridges that seemed too regular to be natural. One structure resembled a stepped pyramid, its sides covered in symbols that shimmered and faded as if alive. "Tell me that's reflection," Leo whispered. "Please tell me that's just the lights." But it wasn't. The symbols glowed on their own, veins of pale blue radiance that crawled across the stone like liquid fire. And then the glow changed. It pulsed. Daniel adjusted the thrusters, pulling the sub away from the nearest wall. "We shouldn't be here," he muttered, sweat glistening on his brow. "This place is awake." Before anyone could respond, the vibration they had felt earlier returned, stronger now, resonating through the hull. The instruments flickered and died, plunging the sub into semi-darkness. Only the faint afterglow of the carvings outside remained, casting eerie shadows across their faces. Emily tore her gaze away from the wall and caught movement in the corner of her eye. Between 2 pillars, something glided silently past, larger than a whale, its outline elongated and unnervingly human. Another shape followed, then another, each one melting back into the black. "They're not ruins," Marcus whispered hoarsely. "They're homes." The pulsing grew faster, echoing like a heartbeat, and the crew suddenly knew the truth. They were not observing a dead city. They were trespassing in one that was still alive. The sub drifted in the shadow of a colossal archway, its keystone buried under centuries of silt. For a long moment no one spoke, The hum of the thrusters, the only sound in the cabin. Then Emily made the decision. None of them wanted to voice. "We have to see inside," Daniel swore under his breath, but minutes later, they were sealed into their dive suits, the hatch creaking as water rushed in around them. One by one they dropped into the black, their helmet lights cutting pale tunnels through the gloom. The structure loomed ahead, impossibly large. As they swam toward it, the carvings along the arch shimmered to life, glowing in recognition of their presence. The air tanks hissed steadily, but each of them felt as though they had crossed into a place where air did not belong. Inside was a chamber wide enough to swallow their vessel whole. The walls were covered in reliefs, worn but unmistakable, humanoid figures descending from the sky, their arms raised as crowds knelt below. In one panel, a great disc-shaped craft hovered above waves, beams of light piercing the sea. The style was alien, yet the story it told was clear. Leo's voice cracked over the comms. "This isn't a ruin, it's a record. They've been here all along." Emily swam closer to a mural, her glove tracing symbols etched deep into the stone. The grooves pulsed faintly beneath her touch. As though alive, she whispered, almost to herself, "It's history. It's their history." Marcus was filming, but his lens suddenly wavered. In the reflection of his own beam, he saw movement at the far end of the chamber, a pale shape elongated into the light, arms too long, head tilted unnaturally. Behind it, others emerged, drifting with terrifying grace. Their eyes glowed faintly, catching the divers' lights and returning them in an unholy shimmer. "Back to the sub," Daniel barked. His voice carried no hesitation now. Now, they pushed off, the water thick with rising silt. The shapes did not pursue. They only hovered at the edges, watching, their heads tilting in unison, as if memorizing the intruders' faces. As Emily clambered back into the sub, her chest tight with fear, she glanced once more through the viewport. The chamber was empty, the shapes were gone, but in the glow of the carvings, the murals seemed to have changed. The figures depicted there were no longer kneeling masses. They were 5 divers, lit by artificial beams, swimming into the heart of the city. The submersible climbed slowly through the black water, its engines groaning under the pressure. No one spoke. Emily sat rigid in her seat, replaying the images of the murals in her mind. The beams, the crowds, the craft descending. She kept seeing those pale figures at the edges of her vision, though the viewport showed only darkness. At 600 feet, the comms crackled to life. "Research vessel Calypso Dawn. This is U.S. Navy asset Proteus. Cut your ascent and surface at the following coordinates. Do not deviate. A recovery team will meet you." Daniel glanced at Emily, his jaw tight. How the hell did they even know we were down here? Static swallowed the channel for a moment, then returned with a sharper tone. "Repeat, surface immediately. Failure to comply will be treated as hostile." There was no choice. Daniel adjusted the course, and the sub broke the waves under a gray, windless sky. Less than a mile away, a massive black vessel waited. It bore no flag, no numbers, only the faint outline of naval architecture. On deck, men in dark uniforms guided them out with clipped efficiency. Their faces were expressionless, movements too rehearsed. Emily noticed the patches on their shoulders bore no insignia, only blank fabric. Their equipment was seized immediately. Cameras, laptops, even dive slates were taken in sealed crates. Marcus tried to protest, but a soldier's hand closed on his shoulder with inhuman strength, forcing him back. The crew was separated without discussion. Emily was ushered into a narrow cabin that smelled of antiseptic. A man in a white coat entered, carrying a syringe. His smile was too wide, his eyes unblinking. "You've had a long dive, Doctor. This will help with the motion sickness." Emily's heart hammered. "We don't get motion sickness." The man leaned close, his voice dropping into something that vibrated through her bones. "You will." He pressed the needle into her arm before she could resist. The world blurred, the lights doubling, then bending into spirals. Shapes loomed at the edge of her vision, tall, thin silhouettes with eyes that glowed faintly blue. Through the haze she turned toward the porthole. One of the soldiers was standing outside, his face reflected in the glass. For a fraction of a second, his human skin shimmered and slipped. Beneath it was something pale and slick, with eyes that did not belong to this world. Emily's vision swam as she fought to stay conscious. The cabin light burned into her eyes, but through the blur she saw movement above her. Figures leaned over, their faces bending unnaturally, features slipping like water across glass. For a moment they looked human. Then the mask dissolved. Their skin was pallid and smooth, stretched over elongated skulls. Their mouths were thin slits, their eyes glowing faintly blue, too large, too still. They wore the uniforms of men, but the fabric clung awkwardly to limbs longer than they should have been. She tried to scream through the regulator mask pressed to her face, but her voice came back muffled. One of them raised a hand and spoke. The words were in English, but layered with an echo that scraped against her bones. "You will not remember." The others repeated it, their voices overlapping like a chorus. She felt a pressure at her temples, a crawling sensation inside her skull. Memories flickered like broken film. The murals, the glowing symbols, the shapes in the dark. Each image was pulled away, stolen, leaving only emptiness behind. Across the ship, the others were undergoing the same treatment. Marcus thrashed in his restraints, his eyes wild, until one of the pale figures leaned close and whispered into his ear. Instantly, his body went limp. Aaron sobbed like a child, whispering the word city again and again, until the sound faded to silence. Daniel, the veteran diver, clenched his jaw and forced his eyes open. "You can't hide forever," he rasped, but the voice inside his mind drowned him out. His memories fractured, splintering into white static. The process was clinical, efficient. The aliens moved with the precision of surgeons who had performed this procedure countless times. To them, the humans were not explorers, not witnesses, but intruders who had to be corrected. Emily felt herself slipping, her body numb, her thoughts dissolving like salt in water. The last thing she saw before blackness swallowed her was a reflection in the polished steel of the cabin wall. Not her own face, but a pale, elongated visage staring back and smiling. Emily woke to the sound of gulls. For a moment she thought it had all been a dream. The ruins, the glowing murals, the figures in the dark. She was lying in her bunk aboard the Calypso Dawn, sunlight leaking through the porthole. Her head throbbed. The others stirred one by one, dazed and pale. Marcus rubbed his eyes and muttered something about faulty air tanks. Aaron and Leo asked what day it was, their voices hollow. No one spoke of the city. No one spoke of the figures. It was as if the dive had never happened. When Emily checked the equipment, she found the cameras empty, their memory cards wiped clean. The dive logs were blank after the first hour. Even her handwritten notes were gone, pages torn neatly from her journal. It was as though some unseen hand had erased not only their evidence, but their very memory of what they had seen. They returned to shore in silence. Interviews were brief and strange. Each of them gave the same answer: technical failure. Mission aborted, nothing found. The words fell from their lips with an unnatural ease, as if scripted. The sponsors seemed disappointed, but not surprised. In the days that followed, Emily tried to move on, but fragments returned in her dreams. Carvings lit by blue fire, long shadows drifting through water, a voice that echoed inside her skull. "You will not remember." She woke each night with the sheets clutched in her fists, the taste of salt water in her mouth. Then came the car. Black, unmarked, parked across from her apartment. Two men sat inside, faces hidden by tinted glass. They never left the vehicle, never approached, but every time she looked through her window, they were there, watching, waiting. One evening, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a heartbeat, her eyes glowed faintly blue, the color of the symbols in the ruins. She stumbled back, breath caught in her throat. When she looked again, her eyes were normal, but the truth was undeniable. The men on the ship had not been rescuers. The government that had intercepted them was not human. They were the same beings that built the city, that lived in the shadows of the trench, that had guided